Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I realize I'm between you and lunch, so I will definitely not go over time, I promise. My work focuses on the individuals and the behaviors that we call violent extremism. And so from that perspective, when I think about online extremism and the online ecosystem, I think about a few key assumptions that exist in the literature. One is that we're focusing on the masses, that we're taking an epidemiological approach in that we're targeting the vast majority in a preventative stance rather than the few individuals who may go on and commit violence. That's not to say this is correct or incorrect, that's just how I understand the research direction to be going. We also make the assumption that social media and online engagement are related to engagement in violent extremism. The evidence is in short supply, in a correlative sense or even a causative sense, but that is certainly there, and it's something we need to think about a little bit more. Of course, social media is extremist, but not all extremists use social media, and those who do, it is a small part, perhaps significant, but a small part of their overall profile. And all of this links, I believe, to this search for root causes. The ability to understand why somebody engages in violent political extremism. Now, all of these questions are complex and all of them are necessary, but for me and for where my research comes from, I struggle to make the link between the polarizing and radicalizing effect of online engagement and those who participate in violence. For me, the nature of the problem seems so overwhelming when we talk about the internet, social media platforms, gaming, and other online sources. It seems insurmountable. So in my effort to understand and engage with this topic, I very much focus on the behavior of the individuals who do go on to commit that violence, which is, of course, a tiny population in comparison overall. What I'm going to talk a little bit about is the far right and the evolution of the far right from very much an online ecosystem to currently an engagement in the offline world. So thank you, and I'll go to the next slide as well. The data I'm going to talk about is initially a project carried out by Moonshot, a name you've heard a number of times. They're based in Dublin with an Irish founder, so we have great connections there. But what we looked at was Irish online far-right spaces, and we tried to understand the emergence of the far right in Ireland. And in order to do this, over 500,000 posts were analysed to understand what was the far right in Ireland, what were the key elements of the far right in Ireland, and how was it evolving and how was it emerging? A second project, a more current project with John Morrison, Joel Busher, Sarah Marsden, and some other colleagues from Portugal, Greece, Italy, and Germany, looks at the manifestation of the far right. So what has happened when we are not talking about just an online ecosystem? So the Moonshot data, when we were talking about the far right in Ireland, but in other jurisdictions as well, but what we were talking about was a very interconnected and international phenomenon, but highly influenced by the local arena. So thinking about the far right as a movement and thinking about their engagement online, what we saw was a huge influence from the American far right, huge influence from those influencers in the United States, and less of an influence from the UK and Europe, ironically enough. But what was really important was it was what we would describe mixed online activity. So you had conspiracy theory, you had anti-mask, anti-COVID, anti-elite, pro-nationalist, xenophobic, racist narratives, and those were all visible online. But it was a real unique environment. So the Irish far right were unique to the Irish setting. So as you all know, there's a very long history of who owns nationalism and who owns the nationalist debate in Irish politics. The troubles in Northern Ireland between loyalist and nationalist communities very much constructs that argument. But what you see emerging in the far right is an effort to reclaim this Irish identity, to reclaim the nationalist narrative, to reframe it as an exclusionary, racist and xenophobic narrative, as opposed to the narrative that previously or perhaps currently exists related to the role of British control of the 6 counties of Northern Ireland. So all of those things really made the Irish far right a unique to Ireland type of far right. And that's the case in all countries across Europe. The local context is hugely important. As I said, conspiracies were a key part of this as well. And conspiracy is a rampant phenomenon online. And I think the thing for, as a psychologist and looking at psychological research outside of the realm of social media, one of the things about conspiracy, it's not about debunking the conspiracy. It's not about proving it incorrect. Conspiracy serves a function for all of us. A lot of people believe in conspiracy theories to some degree. So what we're looking at there is what's the purpose, what's the function, what's the identity, what's the meaning-making role of conspiracy as opposed to pointing out how it's factually incorrect. But all of these things were very relevant to understanding the online ecosystem in Ireland. As our colleagues earlier said, there was both legal and illegal content. Some of the key influencers in Ireland who drew from their American counterparts were very, very adept at dancing the fine line between calls to action, between instigating hate and remaining on the right side of the law. Of course, the comments and the engagement sections were filled with virulent content, much of it hate speech, much of it illegal. But that is, again, what we expected to see elsewhere. For me, and I'll go to the next slide, for me, the next thing that we need to think about is so what? So what that we have all of these people engaging in far-right content online? What does that mean for our world? What does that mean for violent extremism? And that's the difficult question. A lot of existing research talks about the relationship between what people do and what people say, and what people engage with online and what they engage with offline. We know that there's a purpose to social media. We know that there's an identity purpose. We know that it's functional. It can be organizational. The two are inseparable. We can't talk about the two separate worlds as if they can be addressed as separate phenomenon. But engagement in online activism, engagement in online hate, and engagement in online extremism does not guarantee the emergence of extremism offline. Two big issues here for me. One is the role of ideology, and the second is the role of our ability to hold separate thoughts, separate ideas in separate settings. So ideology is sometimes dominant. When we talk about the far right, it's very, very difficult to talk about a coherent ideology. I always think of ideology like a horoscope. We pull what we want from it. It tells us something different depending on who we are. It's a pick and mix approach when we talk about the far right ideology. Some of it is highly political, some of it is highly personalized, related to lifestyle, and there's a range of things that we link with far-right extremism. But the point about cognitive dissonance is an important one. We are all very, very capable of holding ideas in opposition to our behavior. So we can engage online in virulent hate speech, and we can work in a normal environment, communicate with people who are different to ourselves, and be a very tolerant member of society in our behavior. And we know that this is true. This is something that goes on across the board. So what does that mean for our understanding of online hate speech, online extremism, versus the willingness to engage online? So in parallel with the rise in far-right activity online in the Irish space, what we've also witnessed is an increase in contentious action. And a contentious action is when you have the coming together of maybe grassroots protest movements with extremist actors. It's escalating, and the project we're looking on advocates that it is a site of radicalization. So rather than thinking about the online ecosystem as the site of radicalization, we want to explore how the increasing role of contentious action can be considered a site of radicalization, and also escalation in a behavioral sense, which I'll come back to. So contentious action provides a fertile ground for extremism and radicalization. It provides a community. It reinforces ideas, it reinforces extreme ideas. It also provides a really important social media function. So the performative nature of contentious action is hugely relevant for sharing material across social media. It also provides the opportunity for entry-level violence. Now, I mentioned escalation, and we know from criminological research that individuals involved in serious crime, for example, homicide, very routinely are engaged in more minor violence prior to that. And the escalation of violence is something that we've also witnessed in engagement political violence as well. So it does provide that opportunity through rioting or through, facing off with police in protests that do turn riotous. It provides that opportunity for entry-level violence. It, of course, gives a sense of purpose, and also it's very exciting. It's something for people to do, and that can't be dismissed as well. What does that mean for policing and extremism and radicalization? Of course, it's hugely problematic, because if in contentious action, grassroots protest is caught up and intertwined with the actions of a minor number of violent extremists, we have the danger of police overreach, the danger of protesters being clamped down, the danger of shutting down that legitimate protest, which is exactly the narrative that the extreme far right are seeking to propagate in the first place. So what are we thinking in terms of extremism and radicalization, and thinking about contentious action and its integration with the online space? We need to return to what we know to be the basics of radicalization. We need to understand that peer networks are still vital, that calls to action are hugely important, that opportunity to engage in political violence is a significant part of the process of actually engaging, that the excitement and the anonymity of engaging in crowd activity is something that people can be drawn towards. So in that sense, it is opening the door to potential engagement later on. So in terms of social media and in terms of escalation, it is providing the perfect storm for an impending policing threat. And we need to understand the interaction between the two. So to return to the foundations of what we know, the centrality of connection between like-minded individuals, the active role of individuals in their own destiny, be that on the street, in contentious action, in engaging online, in seeking out like-minded individuals, rather than the focus on being on recruitment of vulnerable individuals, the likely previous engagement in other online activity, in other criminal activity, in other antisocial activity, that's highly likely to be the case. And the huge importance of local factors. And all of those things are both available via social media, but also available when engagement occurs in the offline world. The one other thing I would like to say is the focus on root causes. One of the first assumptions I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, the focus on root causes is probably an inhibitor to our advancement of knowledge. Seeking to know why individuals engage in extremism, political violence, is possibly not going to be played out in the research. We know we can't identify causes that are universal across all types of ideology, but even within cases of ideological similarity. And in terms of research, we may never know those routes, but what we may know is how people get involved. And one way of understanding how people getting involved is watching the progression and the escalation from participation in contentious action, as witnessed increasingly in Ireland in the case of this research, and certainly across Europe as well. Thank you very much.